بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. نويت تعلم وتعليم وتذكر والتذكير ونفي إثار إثار استفادة، وحبت ما في كتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم، والدعاء إلى هدى ودلالة على الخير ابتغاء والسلام وعطاء بكل ثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. اللهم علمنا بما ينفعنا وينفعنا بما تعلمنا، وانزلنا من فضلك علما وتعليما انك على كل شيء قدير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Uh, Welcome to everyone for joining us for our monthly Living Islam session. أهلا وسهلا ومرحبا بكم. We pray that you are all in the best of care and the best of afiyah and well-being. And inshallah ta'ala, just as a quick just in case there's anyone that might be new to the Living Islam, is that this is not a formal session. I don't have any pre-topic that I plan to talk about. This is an open session that we have monthly, where people to discuss and to bring about topics that they may want to discuss, but feel that they don't necessarily have the space to do so. So some years back, we created the Living Islam monthly program and gathering. We used to gather in person, but since COVID, it's been online, primarily online, where we just have open discussions. So again, I don't have anything pre-prepared. And if we don't have member participation, then I will just sit here in silence for the next 2 hours, inshallah. But no, so this is a group participation. So, you can unmute yourselves if you wish. You can write in the chat if you wish. Don't feel that I'm the only one that needs to be talking. So if you have some issue, someone else may mention something and you feel that you want to contribute something, please feel free. I like to think of myself as more or less just a moderator in this discussion. So, alhamdulillah. So I do see that someone has already preemptively sent in something that they were wanting to talk about. Reaching out with a resource that I found through Google Scholars and maybe useful for other students, etc. Any resources similar to Google Scholar that are geared towards or well suited for researching the Islamic sciences are welcome. Today I did a Google Scholar search to get insight into the following topic: Mursal, reflections around the Tabi'i and Sahaba narrating hadith for the Prophet ﷺ. So I'm always skeptical about any type of purely online based these approaches to the religion, just because the internet, while it can be beneficial at times, it's often it's too easy for anyone to put up whatever they want in terms of religion. And so I'm always very skeptical when it comes to different readily available online resources that have not necessarily been fully vetted. So I'm not saying that this is, always going to be the case, but it's just a matter of that, I'm just a skeptic with some in particular, just randomly, if I do a search and just seeing what comes up. So that's just me personally. Again, there can be benefit that is found within many different search engines and things of that nature, but there, on the flip side, there can be a lot of harm that can be found, or it could be a situation where something is misunderstood. So as one story goes, that the student was trying to, as he felt, get the most benefit out of his teacher. So he has said to his teacher that I know that you're busy. So this is what I wanted to propose to do, is that I'll study the book on my own. I'll go through the book on my own, and that which I understand, alhamdulillah, and that which I don't understand, then I'll come back to you to ask you for clarification. And the teacher has said in response to him, he said that I'm not worried about the things that you don't understand, but I'm more concerned about the things that you think that you do understand. You know, so the basic aspect of the religion of the deen has always been al-ilm fi sudur laysa fi sutur, that knowledge is in the breasts of men and not in the pages of books. And so, you know, ideally in any science in terms of study, if we can have a teacher that we can directly interact with, who has a connection to those who have a connection to those who have a connection, going all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu, and one who, you know, is striving to live by the prophetic sunnah, that is always going to be considered to be better than trying to go about it on our own, because it's just too easy to uh, have mistakes happen, and Allah knows best.
Brother Samlika,
Walaikum salam salam.
do you have some other questions ahead of me? I have a question.
No, no, feel free.
Okay, so I don't have like the question like phrased exactly, but and it's you know, I'm not even sure it's appropriate to this class because it might be like a little complex, but it's, you know, your response is your response. I'm interested in the like the transition from when we die, so like the soul leaving the body, and then like the barzakh, you know, just like understanding that, and just understanding like this is like at least 3 classes, um just just like as you know, just those spaces, you know, like the soul leaving the body, and then, you know, the barzakh, and like those spaces, you know.
Okay.
Am I like clear, or should I try to clarify more?
Um, well, I'll try to respond, and you let me know if it's addressing your question, or if I'm missing the mark, so to speak. And I was looking, I was, excuse me, I was listening to your question the whole time, even when I was turning my head. I was actually looking to see if I had a particular book on my bookshelf in relation to your question, and because I was just going to let you see it, but I don't see it right now on my bookshelf, so I probably don't have it with me right now. But the book that I was going to mention that may be a benefit in terms of the question that you're asking is a book by Imam Ghazali that's been translated. It's actually a portion of his greater book, the Ihya Ulumuddin, and the book is called The Remembrance of Death in the Afterlife. And so Imam Ghazali has a whole section of his Ihya Ulumuddin, of his multi-volume work, and one section of that is on the remembrance of death in the afterlife. But in relation to your question specifically, is that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's informed us about different aspects of death in terms of the different phases that we may go through. Is that the first of the phases of death is that for those of us who are not prophets, the angel of death is going to come to us at the time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen for us to leave this world. And we're not going to have a choice in the matter. And so the people who have a close relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the people who are pleased with their Lord and longing to meet their Lord, when the angel of death comes, their souls will be taken out gently and they will be willing to go. While those of us who may be struggling with love of this world, love of this dunya, and who may have been sinful or who are not pleased with meeting our Lord, then our souls will come out in a very difficult and painful manner. And part of that is because the more that we're connected to this world, the more that we're not going to want to leave this world. And so this is why we're encouraged to struggle to try to overcome the love of this world and to start to have a love for the afterlife. And this is why in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in many places or in different places that the akhirah, the next life, is better for us than this life. You know, trying to get us to have a longing for the next life. Because the more that we have a longing for the next life, the easier it will be when death comes to us. But after a person's soul is removed from their body, there is actually going to be a time where the soul is going to be reconnected to the body. And this is going to be at the time where the person is going to be prepared for death, inshallah. When the body is washed and shrouded, prayed over, and buried. And so this particular time period, the person is actually going to be able to see and to hear and to feel everything that is going on. This is why when people wash a body for preparing for burial, one of the recommended actions, or what are the etiquettes of doing it, is that you do it in the most comfortable of ways. So you use water that is lukewarm, so that is not a difficulty on the person that's being washed. That you keep the private parts covered so that they still have a sense of modesty. That you have dhikr and the remembrance of Allah being done while the washing is taking place, and some of the other different etiquettes. And then the person is shrouded and they are prayed over, and then they are buried. And then in the time of the burial, the person will be able to hear the people who are there at their burial all the way up until the last person leaves. They'll be able to hear the footsteps of the last person leaving the place where they are buried. And this is going to be the time when Munkar and Nakir, the two angels of the grave, will come to ask the person those three questions: who is your Lord, who is your prophet, and what is your religion? And so a person is only going to be able to answer these questions if they live the reality where Allah is their Lord, Islam is their religion, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is their prophet. So it's not a thing of just trying to say I can memorize the answers, but it's a thing of, did I live those responses? And if a person is able to answer those questions correctly, then their grave will be made spacious. They will have one of the gardens from the gardens of paradise in terms of their grave, that they will have a grave that is filled with good company and nice smells, and they will have a blissful time in the grave. If a person does not answer those questions correctly, then they're going to have the opposite. Their grave is essentially going to be one of the pits of the hellfire, and they are going to have a difficult time in terms of the time that they're going to be in the barzakh, the time that they're going to be in the intermediary realm. And this is going to be with them all the way up until the day of rising. So the barzakh gives us an indication of how our akhir is going to be. And then there's going to be the blowing of the trumpet of Israfil, which is going to cause all things in existence to cease to exist, including Israfil himself. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give life back to Israfil, and Israfil will blow the trumpet again, and the resurrection will take place. And then at the resurrection, the people will be gathered, and they will be going from prophet to prophet, asking for intercession. And all the prophets will say that this is not for me, until they come to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ will say, Ana laha, I am for it, I am for it. And the Prophet ﷺ will intercede with his Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala and the day of judgment will start to go into full swing, all the way up until the people of paradise enter into paradise and the people of hellfire enter into hellfire. Um, for the sake of, I mean, we could probably spend the whole rest of the time just going into more details of these type of things, but were these some of the details that you were looking for in terms of um the barzakh and what happens at death?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. I didn't know like that the person could in that period with like the washing and the shrouding and everything, I didn't know that the person could hear, you know. So I just Jazakallah khair, and that was like some information that I didn't know before. So while they're in the barzakh, like there's still like inshallah, like for instance things that we could do on their behalf, right? Like you could do good deeds on their behalf, inshallah, and then if Allah wills, he could accept those deeds on their behalf,
Yes.
correct?
Yes. So most of the scholars mention that, and we have indication of that from the Prophet Muhammad SAW directly, where the Prophet SAW, he mentioned that all a person's deeds are cut off at death except for three, and that is a sadaqah jariyah, that is an ongoing charity, meaning some type of charity that the person has given that people continue to benefit from, and ilm nafi', beneficial knowledge, meaning some type of knowledge that they taught someone and people are still benefiting from that, as well as walad salih, and that is a righteous child who makes dua for their parents. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he's indicated that, for example, he gave the example for the parents, meaning that if they have a righteous child, that the child making dua for them is something that benefits them in the grave. And so, yes, we have the possibility of trying to benefit someone in their grave. Also, for example, paying the debts of someone who may have been indebted at the time of death. Also, making Hajj or Umrah on behalf of someone who has never made Hajj or Umrah and they've passed away. Also, by fasting on behalf of a person who may have had fast that they needed to make up. That, you know, these are all things that we can try to do on a person's behalf, even after they passed away.
Okay, and the one last question, and I Jazakallah khairan for your time, and for the other folks allow me to have this time. So I from what I've read in regards to like the people of the grave like being able to hear you, is that Allahu Alam, it was like there was like an instance when the Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam may have like spoken to someone in the grave, but from what I read, it's like there's not like necessarily like consensus on whether under normal, like that was the Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So under normal circumstances, which would be us communicating with those in the grave, not them communicating back. We know that they can't speak to us or we cannot hear them, but like them hearing us, you know? So like, it's like it's difficult when there is a loss, you
Yes.
know? And so there's like, all these like phases of grief and things like that. So it's just like these things in regards to like um how like the kind of not manners exactly, but the disposition that we should have, with our loved ones like that we've lost, and things like that, like, and seek refuge in Allah. We don't ever want to, we want to have the right disposition. You mean, like to let them like to let them go, you know what I mean? Like to not be um to not have like, any like false notions, you know, um about, about those loved ones, but still like maybe being able to do things for them or, just yeah, that
Yeah.
was a whole little tangent. Um
Okay. Well, so the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned to us that the people who have passed away, they can hear. And so as I mentioned that, for example, the people will hear the footsteps of those as they walk away. And even from the standpoint of when the Prophet ﷺ, and after one of the battles, the Prophet ﷺ had went to the side of the disbelievers, and he was speaking to them, and he was asking them, have you found what your Lord has promised to be true? For I found what my Lord has promised to be true. And one of the companions who was standing next to him was saying, Ya Rasulullah, they're mayyits, they're dead. And the Prophet ﷺ had informed them that, they hear me just as you do, it's just that they cannot respond. And so there is the concept of those who have passed away still being able to hear those who are in this world, but the aspect of to what extent that is, as you mentioned, can be a source of difference of opinion, of ikhtilaf. But at the end of the day, when it comes to death, again, one of the things is to get ourselves to a point where we're comfortable with death and comfortable with dying. And part of it is the aspect of knowing that ultimately this is our reality, no matter what it is that we do in this life, that no matter what or how we live our lives, death is something that is certain. And so we want to get to a point where we actually start having a longing for death, in the sense that we want to prepare ourselves for our meeting with our Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. And, part of the way of doing this is to take the prophetic advice and to reflect upon death on a regular basis. That essentially there shouldn't be a day that goes by except that one is reflecting upon their own mortality, the reality that they're going to die. Because the more we reflect upon death and the temporary nature of this world, then inshallah, the more we will start to have a growing want for the hereafter and have less desire for the things of this world. And then in terms of those who may precede us, one of the things to remember is that that's all it really is that all they've done is preceded us. You can look at it from the standpoint of someone who has gone on to live in another location, and you're going to be moving to that same location, as well. It's just that they moved before you did, because all of us are going to be going to the barzakh. And so we, in relation to others, in terms of those who are a part of our loved ones, we try to have a good opinion of Allah. We try to have husnul dhan billah, a good opinion of Allah, that He will take care of them, and that, inshallah, they will be of those who will receive His mercy. And then whatever we are permitted to do on their behalf, then that we should do it. I mean, for example, with the parents, some of the scholars mention that for every obligatory prayer, one should say dua for their parents. That as for example, once you finish the obligatory prayers, to say dua for your parents, and part of this is the aspect that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions the goodness to parents alongside the command to worship Him and not to make partners with Him. That He's commanded the Muslims that they not take up associate partners with Him, and with the parents to show excellent or beautiful character. And so these are all possibilities, but at the end of the day, we try to increase our desire for meeting our Lord and decrease our desire for the things of this world. It's not an easy feat, but it's something that is definitely doable if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives a person success. And so I seen in the chat, others were mentioning, for example, Imam Qurtubi's work, The Soul's Journey After Death. So that's another work that can also be looked at as well. And then someone had put a link to the other book that I had mentioned, which was Remembrance of Death in the Afterlife by Imam Al-Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala.
Okay, Jazakallah khairan. As you said, this is like such a deep subject because, and I'm not gonna ask you another thing because I see the other student of knowledge next to you, and I'll save my questions for him. Just kidding. Alhamdulillah. May Allah bless him and your family, you know. I mean,
I mean,
uh, yeah, because another question at a later time I could ask you too, inshallah, is really about uh the age when a person becomes like accountable, because that's another question kind of like pertaining to death. But Jazakallah khairan, thank you for your answers, for everybody in the chat, and for the other student of knowledge who's also given me his time. The one next to you there, mashallah. Thank you so much.
I'm gonna tell
Okay.
her another answer.
we'll wait for a second. Jazakallah khairan.
Yeah, thank you.
I seen there was a question in the chat. What more can we do as Muslims for the genocide in Gaza? Is there a specific prayer, action, etc.? I don't feel like enough is being done. I feel very helpless, and I feel our ummah is breaking down even more. Any advice is appreciated. Can we talk about what is happening in Gaza and what the purpose is? I'm having a hard time. I keep reminding myself that my actions, no matter what the outcome, is important, but I'm feeling very defeated, and it's breaking me down seeing what is happening and also seeing how people in the world are supporting the killing of innocent people. So um, this is a very sensitive topic, obviously. And the thing is that we should, as a ummah, have a concern and have a sadness over what is happening in Gaza. As the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned, is that the ummah is supposed to be like one body or one thing. And so that if some portion of it is feeling pain, then we should all, share in that pain. And so this is something that if a person was not affected by this, they would really have to question how is it that they've connected to the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu, because the overarching concern of the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu and his companions was always the Ummah. So if we are in a situation where we don't have concern for the Ummah, then we should really question, what is taking place in our heart, such that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not placed that concern in our hearts. Now, in terms of directly what can be done, is that whatever means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed in our capacity, then that is what we should utilize. And we should never think little of anything that we do. So number one is that, for example, sometimes we feel like, and this is somewhat alluded in the question, but sometimes we feel like, dua is not enough. And the thing is that if we come to that thought process, so to speak, what it actually is an indication of is that we and I say this not trying to offend anyone, but it's just reality that many of us face, is that we don't fully understand who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Meaning that anything that we want in this life, it doesn't matter how small or how great it is, it can only come by way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the greatest thing that we can do is make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if we want to increase the likelihood of our dua being accepted, is that we can get up in the middle of the night and make a sincere dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the thing is that we also have to remember is that we are often very hasty, and that we often want a solution that is going to be, right around the corner, and something that seems to be, very direct. Whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the one who is al-Hakim, He is the wise. And so whether or not we see a wisdom in something that's happening in this creation, we should always remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, everything that He does has a wisdom. one of the things that we could look at is that, you know, how many shuhada has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made with this particular situation? So that these are people, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, about those who die for his cause. لا يكون, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions in Surah Al-Baqarah, do not say about those who die في سبيل الله أموات بل أحياء بل أحياء عند ربهم ولا يشعرون. That do not say about those who die in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they are dead, rather they are alive with their Lords, though you perceive it not. And so the thing is that, you know, the station that those who have passed away may receive from this is one of those things where, from an outward perspective, it seems as if they're being debased or that they're being completely wrong. But in the ultimate reality of things, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is raising them in darajat through those who are wronging them. So this is not to try to say that they should be being killed or being wronged like this, but it's to say that when we put it in perspective with the akhirah, is that we understand that from the outward perspective, those who are committing these atrocities may feel like they are succeeding or that they're defeating or whatever the case may be, but really they're raising in ranks those who are being killed like this. Similar to, for example, the example of Bilal bin Rabah, where his slave owner felt, Umayyah bin Khalaf, who felt that he was belittling Bilal or that he was torturing Bilal or that he was lowering Bilal. The only thing that he was doing was raising Bilal in darajat. That Bilal ibn Rabah saying Ahadun Ahad all the time that he was being tortured by Umayyah bin Khalaf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was raising him in degrees. Such that the Prophet ﷺ has said about Bilal what? He said, Bilal, why is it that I hear your footsteps ahead of me in paradise? You know, that's how high of a station that Bilal came to in relation to his relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the individuals who have passed away, the individuals who have passed away, that inshallah they have a high station with their Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, again, going back to our individual aspects, is that, again, whatever means that we have to give in terms of assistance, then we take those means. So if we have money that we can give to try to help and support them, then we can do that. If we have the capability of physically traveling over there to help and support them, then we can do that. If we have some type of influence, whether it be political or otherwise, then we would use that. So whatever capacity Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed you in to try to address the concern, never belittle that means, because that can be a means for you also rising in ranks with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you're showing your concern for his ummah, for those whom he loves subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so again, it's just going to be whatever capacity. But if you want to get a better understanding of some of the things that are taking place, because even though this is a situation where it's coming from a governmental system, a Zionist governmental system, there's still an aspect of religion that is associated with it. And this goes back to certain beliefs within Judaism and Christianity. And so if you really want to get a greater insight into this, one of my teachers has a series in relation to this, Sheikh Hamza Karamali, on his Basira Education YouTube channel. He has a whole series in relation to what is taking place in Gaza and how Christian and Jewish interpretations of the Old Testament are being manifested in what is happening in Gaza today. So that is a resource that you can also look in order to kind of see what's going on. And yes, I mean, again, you should be saddened by seeing, those who are still struggling and still suffering. And so again, whatever means that you have, and again, never think that dua is not enough. That remember who it is that you're making dua to. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is able to do all things. And so any hardship that a believer goes through in this life, we have the understanding from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu that he will be the one who will compensate us for that in the akhirah. Meaning that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu he will be the one, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he will, as the Messenger sallallahu informed us, is that any hardships or difficulties that we go through in this life, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward us for it, even to the pricking of a thorn. And so, but again, whatever means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, then inshallah we can take those means to try to help and assist, because it's not to say that we don't try to help and assist those when we see them going through suffering. And so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give aid and assistance to the people of Gaza, and may He allow it to be a means of raising them in darajat in the akhirah, and may they have all the best of this life and the next life, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them victory and give them freedom from the oppression that they are going through. And I mean, there are all different other types of wisdoms that we can talk about, as well. I mean, the thing is that at the end of the day, more and more people are seeing now the immense atrocity of what's taking place. And so this is bringing people to have go into more research and looking at the history. Is that the unfortunate situation is that for some of us, we don't really look into something until we see a tragedy associated with it. And so how many people are now learning about the history of Palestine? Whereas previously, even Muslims, many Muslims were not fully aware of the history of Palestine. But now, since this atrocity is taking place, you have more and more Muslims who are now, learning about the history of Palestine and learning and talking about it and wanting to do something about, what is taking place. And so again, there are different wisdoms Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can bring about, through tragedy. But again, we try to do our part in order to help and assist, whenever we're able to.
Genocide.
And so what's the answer that you're going to do? Tell me first.
That at the age of puberty, you will be accounted for.
So the Ustad sitting next to me, he wants to answer the question that was asked in terms of when will a person be held accountable? When will a person be held accountable in this life? Okay, what's the answer?
So the answer is when the person reaches puberty,
So yeah.
and when a person dies, that in a young age will most likely go to Jannah.
So puberty is considered to be the time when a person becomes legally responsible. So the ulama, they've differed in regards to what constitutes puberty. However, for example, Imam Shafi, he considered to be the signs of puberty that a woman or a man has a nocturnal emission, or they have sexual fluid that exits from them. So that is one of the signs of puberty. Or for a woman, that she has a menstrual cycle. Or if a person has neither of those happen to them, then just by the fact of reaching 15 lunar years of age would be a sign of puberty. And so when a person reaches puberty, then a person becomes legally and morally responsible. And so now they'll be held accountable for their actions. But prior to that, they're not going to be held accountable for their actions. And so it's on the guardian to try to guide them to that which is best, so that when they do become morally responsible, they are able, for lack of a better way of saying it, hit the ground running, so to speak. Salam, wa salam. Welcoming your reflections on an overview of the distinctions between shirk al-asma as-sifat or shirk al-rububiyyah, as well as the third type of shirk. Also, if I miss salawat al-wabin can be made up, and if so, what are the methods of doing so on the different madhabs? So the aspect of what you're referring to as shirk al-asma wa sifat or shirk al-rububiyyah, and shirk al-uluhiyyah, these are all actual concepts that were not established from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ directly. These were concepts that were established afterwards by some scholars. I actually don't know who's the original alim to come up with this concept. But essentially what it is that some have, mentioned that you can do shirk of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in many different ways. So for example, the aspect of asma wa sifat in terms of shirk is that you give someone or something the attribute that is only attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we talk about the attributes in terms of the asma, in terms of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his attributes, we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one that has them in ultimate reality in its perfection. So what that means is that, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's Ar-Rahman. So we have that alif lam in the beginning of Rahman. And so essentially Rahman is a form of mercy. And so we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is the merciful, meaning that the perfection of what it means to be merciful, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that possesses it. Now, in terms of his creation, we can have some aspect of that, meaning that we can be merciful from the standpoint of our imperfection as human beings, but we will never have the perfect attribute of rahmah, of mercy. That is only reserved from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all of his other attributes are the same. This is why, for example, you don't name someone Ar-Rahman or Al-Latif or Al-Qabir or Al-Wajib al-Wujud or any of these asma, any of these names or the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But for example, a person can be Abdul Rahman or Abdul Latif or Abdul Qadir, so on and so forth. They can be the slave of the one who is possessed of these perfect perfections. And so if you associate that to some other creation, then that is essentially a type of shirk, or shirk in rububiyyah, that the lordship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that if you associate any attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's lordship over his creation, that will be a form of shirk. So essentially it's the aspect of saying that in the different ways that we can look at the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that a person can possibly create shirk in it. But like I said, this is a division that was brought up later in the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and is not something that's coming directly from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so if you actually want to get technical, in many circles of Aqidah, they don't necessarily break up shirk in this fashion. So for example, if you go to Ash'ari and Maturidi Aqidah, you're not necessarily going to see it broken up in this fashion. This is generally speaking going to be more of a Salafi way of breaking up the aspect of shirk. In terms of Salatul Awwabin, since Salatul Awwabin is a sunnah, and so for those who are not familiar with Salatul Awwabin, this is the 6 rak'ahs that are prayed after Salatul Maghrib as a sunnah. If a person misses it, some of the ulama, or many of the ulama would say that there's not really a way that you can make up for it. Because in particular, like of the conditions of Salatul Awwabin is that you stand up immediately after Salatul Maghrib to pray these 6 rak'ahs, that you don't have any type of long break in between. And so the thing is that when you have a prayer that is a sunnah, then if you miss it, it is not a situation where you will be held accountable in terms of a sin. And if you miss it because of, some type of, difficulty, you're traveling or you're extremely busy, you have some type of situation happening, then inshallah, it could be a situation where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will write for you the reward of that action that he knows that you normatively do because of whatever may have kept you from doing it at that moment. And so essentially, the best thing is to just try to make sure that it doesn't become a habit in terms of like if you establish it for yourself that you're going to consistently do Salat al-Awabin, then try to make sure that the missing of it is not a habit that is formed. But if it happens occasionally that you may miss it, then you just missed it for that day. But again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may give you the reward for it, knowing that you didn't do it intentionally. And Allah knows best. And yeah, so alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair for Sister Tahmina. She placed in the chat the link for Sheikh Hamza's videos. And yes. And so, yes, this is the correct series, the truth about Palestine that nobody's talking about. And so, again, in that particular series, Sheikh Hamza, he's going over the religious aspects of the situation that's happening in Gaza that have to do with the interpretation of some of the Jews and Christians in regards to the Old Testament. I mean, it's not a short series by any stretch of the imagination. Some of the videos are close to an hour long, but again, if you are willing to watch it, it really gives you a religious understanding in regards to what is taking place in Gaza. Sister Nina, go ahead. You can just unmute yourself, dude.
Thank you. I'll definitely check out that series. So it will answer religiously why this is happening.
Yeah, so the thing is that the thing, what is happening in Gaza right now, there are many different aspects to it, but part of it is a religious aspect. So Sheikh Hamza is coming from the religious aspect in terms of, why there are people who are justifying what is happening in Gaza, even though we can see women and children and elderly being mutilated, being killed, being tortured, so on and so forth. But there's a reason based upon certain dogmatic beliefs within the Old Testament. And Sheikh Hamza goes through, these different types of things. But again, he's coming from an Islamic perspective. So he does a much better job. And also he's much more thorough because he also provides resources for everything that he mentions in this series. So that's why I would recommend that more than me trying to mention it in less than a 2-hour session.
Thank you. Alhamdulillah. Inshallah, I will definitely look into that because I'm having a very difficult time right now. I did have my hand up real quick. If we could just go back to the questions you were answering about death. I just had a question to add on. When we pass, do we know our relatives? When we see the other souls, do we know will we recognize our relatives, or will everybody not know? I don't know if that question makes sense.
So you're talking about in the Barzakh or on the day of resurrection?
Either.
So in the Barzakh, there has been mention that, for example, when a soul is placed into the earth, in particular for the person who's a believer, because remember we said before is that for the person who dies in a state that is displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then their grave will be of the gardens of the pits of the hellfire. So, but for the person who's a believer, it's mentioned that they will be able to meet with those of their families who have passed away prior to them, and that's, they will ask about those who are still in this life, and so on and so forth. So there is mention of that. But on Yom Qiyamah, on the day of resurrection, what is going to take place is that, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ الْمَرْءُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ وَأُمِّهِ وَأَبِيهِ وَصَاحِبَتِهِ وَبَنِيهِ. That this is going to be a day where يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ الْمَرْءُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ, when a person will flee from his brother, وَأُمِّهِ وَأَبِيهِ, and his mother and his father, وَصَاحِبَتِهِ وَبَنِيهِ, and his close companion and his children. So on the day of judgment, we will recognize one another, but we're not going to care about anyone. Everyone on that day is going to be saying nafsi, nafsi, excluding the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the only one that's going to be saying other than nafsi, nafsi. So even if we recognize our family on Yom Qiyamah, we're not going to care about them, because that day is such a day that the only thing that was going to concern us is standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and us being taken into account for how we lived our lives in this world.
Thank you.
No problem. When I miss a prayer, not due to forgetfulness, but due to poor time management, should I pray as soon as I get home? If I miss a Fajr, should I pray as soon as I wake up? So the majority of the ulama, particularly in the Shafi school and the Hanbali school, for example, is that they, so you're looking for the Hanafi answer. Okay, so that clarifies it. So in the Hanafi school, you would pray a prayer that you miss immediately as soon as you remember, excluding Salat al-Fajr. And the reason for that is that in the Hanafi school of law, they take in consideration that normatively one of the times that is forbidden to pray is when the sun is rising. So if a person wakes up and after having missed Fajr, and it's during the time when the sun is rising, such that it's normally forbidden, then in the Hanafi school, they would say that you are not allowed to pray until the sun reaches the point where it will now be permissible again to pray. So that's from the standpoint of the Hanafi school. Like even, for example, in the Hanafi school, if a person is praying Salat al-Fajr and part of their prayer goes over into that forbidden time, according to the Hanafi school, they would say that the entire Fajr prayer would now be invalid. Why? Because your time has actually now overlapped into a time that is forbidden to pray. So the Hanafi school, they are more restrictive in regards to this when it comes to Fajr prayer. However, the other prayers, they would say that as soon as you remember, you would make it up. The only exception is going to be for Fajr. Here's another question. Is there any resource you can recommend for preparing for Ramadan? Imam al-Ghazali, you see I keep referencing Imam al-Ghazali. He has a book that's been translated, and again, this is a portion taken from his Ihya al-Ulumuddin on the inner dimensions of Islamic worship. So there are different translations of it, but inner dimensions of Islamic worship. I might even have it up here. No, I don't have it with me right now. But Imam Ghazali has a book called Inner Dimensions of Islamic Worship. And so that is a good starting point in terms of Ramadan. And yes, inshallah, we'll also be doing a Ramadan prep with the Mecca Center, inshallah. But it's going to be primarily based upon Imam Ghazali's work, or concepts from Imam Ghazali's work, but it's going to be both fiqh and spiritually based, inshallah. Um, uh, so inshallah we'll be doing that. And the other question, why can we pray with a cat in the room but not a dog? Well, it really just depends on the aspect of the fiqh. So, yeah, I have two cats at this point. Um, um, so the thing is that in the Shafi'i madhab, for example, you wouldn't really you really wouldn't pray in a room with a cat because in the Shafi'i madhab, cat hair is considered to be najis. So a little bit of cat hair is considered to be excused, but the default ruling in the Shafi'i madhab is cat hair is najis. This is part of the reason why I'm following, especially in terms of prayer, the Hanafi madhab. But in the Shafi school, cat hair would actually be deemed najis, and so you wouldn't necessarily pray in a room where there was a cat. However, the Prophet ﷺ, he has mentioned certain things in relation to cats that he hasn't mentioned in relation to dogs. Dogs are, for one, they're not deemed to be as clean as cats are. And also, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that cats are animals that more or less live amongst us. So it's common in different places for cats to be a more common animal that you will see amongst people. Um, and so cats are considered to be cleaner animals that also serve a function in terms of rodent control, somewhat. So the thing is that this is not to say that we have a completely ill feeling towards dogs. The Prophet ﷺ, he has different situations where he's been very merciful towards dogs, but in terms of us as Muslims, is that cats are deemed to be pure than dogs are. And so one of the aspects of the prayer is that purity is a condition of the prayer. And so that's one aspect of it. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a situation where these are the legislations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us through his messenger, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And so these are, some of the things that go into it. But however, the other schools of law, the Hanafi, the Hanafi, Maliki, and Hanbali school, they don't consider cat hair to be najis at all. The Shafi school is the only one that actually considers cat hair to be najis. And so, again, that makes it a situation where, just from that basic aspect, you're able to keep the condition of tahara, of cleanliness. And so that is the case. Dogs are considered to be a form of najasa, excluding in the Maliki school of law, but even in the Maliki school of law, even though they don't consider dogs to be najis in of themselves, they still don't say that a Muslim should have a dog in their home. Because we know that the Prophet ﷺ did mention that the angels of mercy do not come into the home of a person that has a dog. And again, part of that reason is that dogs are not deemed as clean as cats are, for example. And at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best.
Is there a school of thought that does allow dogs? I'm so sorry. I apologize. You say it so quickly. Sometimes I can't catch exactly what schools you're speaking about. So I apologize if you answered that already.
So when you say a school of law that does allow dogs, what do you mean by allow? You mean to have them as a pet?
Yes.
Excuse me. No, that's a short answer. So the aspect of having a dog is that if it's not to say that a Muslim can never have a dog, but what we are saying is that if a Muslim is to have a dog, it has to be for a reason. Meaning that, for example, the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned that it will be fine to have a dog if you're going to be using it for hunting. And this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually mentions in the Quran, that you can use a dog for hunting, or you can use a dog for farming. So if you have a sheep dog or something like that, you can use it for farming. Or if you're going to use it for security, meaning that if you need security, for your protection, then it'll be permissible to have a dog. Or, in our times and more modern times, for example, if you're going to use it for a medical purpose. So, for example, you have a seeing eye dog or something like that. These would be permissible reasons to have a dog, but all of them are from the basis of the actual need. The aspect of having a dog just as a pet, none of the schools of law would recommend it. As I mentioned, one of the basic aspects of it is that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that the angels do not enter into the home of the person that has a dog. However, as well along with this is that those situations in which a person may have a dog is that they should keep the dog outside, but they have to keep it in a humane manner. Like you can't just keep your dog in the backyard and just expose them to all the elements and any dangers that may be outside. But rather, if you're going to keep a dog, you should keep it outside and you should provide it a humane and a good way of living. That you shouldn't just just keep it out, roaming in its own filth and so on and so forth. But you need to take care of that dog if you're going to have one. But again, it should be for a reason. And so all of the schools permit cats in the sense, it's not necessarily, there's difference of opinion amongst some of the scholars in regards to whether or not it'd be permissible to purchase a cat, because there are hadith that actually say do not purchase a cat. But there is different interpretations of what that actually means. But in general, all the schools permit cats being within the home of a Muslim, and it wouldn't necessarily break the prayer. Like even in the Shafi school, a cat in of itself would not break the prayer. It would just be that if you had a lot of cat hair on you, technically speaking, in the Shafi school, they would consider that to be would be considered to be najis, and so that would be something that could possibly break a person's prayer. But the aspect of actually owning a cat, you have a cat that's on your property or in your home, that would be considered to be permissible according to all the schools of law, and Allah knows best. When we visit someone's grave, do they know we are there? Many of the ulama would say that yes, they are aware when someone visits their grave, and Allah knows best. And it's actually a sunnah to visit the graves.
So is there another question? Assalamu alaikum, or can I ask another question?
Bismillah. This is open, so you don't have to ask. If I'm quiet, then feel free.
Okay. So I think, well, okay. Sometimes I combine questions with statements. So in this land, we're Allahu Alam, we're not in the Muslim lands. So say there's a situation where, your loved one is like a victim of a crime, say, and they lose their life, but the perpetrator of the crime, is not apprehended. But like, say like who the perpetrator was or something, but the legal system is not able to, like convict that individual, right? So how do we as Muslims like deal with situations like this when, say we've lost loved ones to, again, like crimes or like homicide, and like how do you like address justice, or things like that in this situation, and what is the like for like does the person who has lost their life have like rights, like how do you, you know like um address quote unquote like justice in a situation like that?
Okay.
I
So
like to ask easy questions because I know you're going to have harder questions, so I want to make my questions particularly easy for you and the other Ustad.
so in this particular case, one of the things to, particularly if you're talking about the aspect of murder, is that one of the things to understand in relation to murder is that from the standpoint of this world, you can never get justice for murder. Like, so even if you were to apprehend the perpetrator and you were to bring them to justice, whatever that will look like for you, whether that be life imprisonment, whether that be the death penalty, whether that be 20 or 30 years in prison, that is not going to necessarily count as true justice. Why? Because the life that they took is still gone. Like, you even ask people who do like revenge killing, like, someone that was close to them is killed, and then they go and they kill the person that killed them. For a good number of those people, I work in a prison, so I deal with inmates all the time. But for a good number of those people, the killing of the person that killed their loved one doesn't necessarily fully give them a sense of justice. Why? Because they're still dealing with the pain of their loved one being gone. Like, some of them may have a sense of justification, like, the family of that particular person is now going through the same pain that they're going through, but it still doesn't bring that person back. So if a person's in a situation of knowing the person that may have killed their loved one and there not being any course of justice that's given to that individual, then just know that, for one, true justice can never be done, in particularly with murder, but that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is ahkam hakimin. He is the most just of those who show justice. So in the next life, everyone is going to receive justice. And so if I lose a loved one in this life, they're going to be more than compensated for that in the next life. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the one that is going to give full justice to anyone that has been wronged. So that is one of the things that we can find comfort in, is knowing that at the end of the day, before everything is said and done, all of us, for every wrong that we have experienced, will receive justice for that. Whether it be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places mercy in our hearts and we forgive that individual, such that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive us for the wrongs that we have done, or whether it be a situation where we are recompensed for the harm that we experience from an individual if we don't forgive that individual, or whether it's that our some of our evil deeds are given to someone that wronged us, such that that is taken off of us in terms of evil deeds. That's, at the end of the day, no one who has been wronged is going to be left uncompensated for the wrongs that they've experienced. And so this is why the ulama, they've mentioned, very, strongly, that one of the worst sins that a person can commit is against another person. Because before Allah will forgive that person, meaning that a person who's wronged someone else, before that person can be forgiven, they have to get forgiveness from the person that they've wronged. And so the thing is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's all merciful, He's all forgiving, but people are not. And so that's why we should strive our utmost to try to not harm other people. And even ourselves being willing to forgive and have mercy with other people, because if we're willing to be forgiving and merciful other people, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be more willing to be forgiving and merciful with us. But again, the aspect of justice, that is really something that can only come in the next life, especially with something like murder.
Okay, so we have the opportunity to like forgive like the you know, like a perpetrator of a crime against our family. So does it matter whether they're Muslim or not Muslim? And like, is that forgiveness just like a matter like between us and Allah where we say like we've forgiven the person? And is there any kind of like, is there any like criteria at all? For instance, if like the person that committed harm against the other person is still harming people or something like that, like, so, you know, like what would like forgiveness look like? And you know, and then it's like that forgiveness, well, you're saying that the justice is not like anything that we're gonna like necessarily experience in this life. So like, you know, I just like kind of like what would that forgiveness look like? And you know, like sometimes like I personally feel like conflicted about like, you know, am I not delivering something for my loved one, you know, because I might forgive somebody who harmed them, you know?
So the thing is that for one, the aspect of forgiving does not necessarily mean that we forget. And the thing is that I may forgive someone, even though I may still, you know, seek that they be held accountable, particularly in the case, like you mentioned, like if they're still harming other people. Because one of the things is that we cannot create a situation where other people are being harmed. So I'll give you an example. In Islam, if there is a murder, an unjust killing, then the family, and particularly the head of the family, he would decide whether or not he was going to forgive this individual that killed his family member, or if he was going to accept a blood payment, which would be the equivalent of 100 camels, or if he would decide to have a life for life. That meaning that the one who killed his family member, that his life be taken. But even if in the situation where the person, the family decides that they're going to forgive the perpetrator, the Islamic magistrates, the Islamic judicial system could actually still decide that they're going to enact their own punishment against this individual, in particular if they feel that this individual is a harm to others in society. So the thing is that there are different ways of which this can be dealt with. But again, the aspect of forgiving does not necessarily mean that I forget. It's that I can forgive someone, even though I may, you know, help, or I may, if I'm in a position of authority, you know, place a person in a situation where they cannot harm other people. Because we also have the responsibility to try to stave off harm from others. However, from that standpoint of forgiveness, is that again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the most just. And so when a person does something that harms multiple people, that person is going to have to deal with all of those people individually. So for example, if a person harms me and my relative and some other people, then each one of us are going to have our own reckoning with that individual. So I may decide that I'm going to forgive that individual, but someone else that he's harmed may decide that they're not. And so he will still have to have an account with that individual that's going to be settled in the next life. So
Do you mean like emotionally harmed? Like, say if there's like family members, and do you mean like if so the person would still like, okay, one family member might forgive him, but if other family members didn't, then he or she would still have to deal with them? Or
any harm, it doesn't matter what the harm is. Anytime that you harm another person, then if you don't reconcile the situation in this life, then it'd be a situation that will be reconciled in the next life. And so it doesn't matter what the harm is, whether it's emotional, physical, mental, any harm. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, La darar wa la darar, that there is no harming nor reciprocating of harm. So harm any harm that you do to another person, if you don't reconcile that situation in this life, then that situation will be rectified in the next life. And so it's better to do it in this life, because in the next life, you're talking about your good deeds or the possibility of taking on someone else's evil deeds. But again, all of this is going to be sorted out by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before a person is going to be able to continue, whether it's going to be to paradise or whether it's going to be to hellfire. And so any harm that you do to a person, you're going to have to, be taken into account for it. And so that's why we say that it's a very dangerous situation to harm other people. This is why, like I mentioned to people, it's like one of the worst things. And if you really think about it from an intellectual standpoint, one of the stupidest things that a person can do is that if they dislike someone, speak ill about them. And one of the early scholars, Al-Hasan al-Basri, it mentions that he taught a person a lesson, so to speak, in regards to this, that there was an individual in the time of Hasan al-Basri who used to speak ill about him. He used to talk behind his back. And so one day, Hasan al-Basri, it mentions that he came and he gave this person a whole bunch of gifts. Like he just gave him a whole bunch of gifts, and they were really nice gifts. And the man that was speaking ill about Hasan al-Basri was just kind of shocked, like, that I'm speaking bad about you. Like, why are you giving me these gifts? And so Hasan al-Basri has said to him, he said to him that, well, I've heard that you're giving me your good deeds. And so I didn't know of a way to repay you. So I'm, just trying to, give you these little things in order to, compensate you for the good deeds that you keep giving me. And then there was one of the other early scholars who have mentioned, he said that if there's going to be anyone that I was going to backbite, it would be my mother. Why? Because he said that if there's going to be anyone that's going to get my good deeds, I'm going to give it to my mother. And so the thing is that as a Muslim, we do our best to try to keep from harming anyone. Because at the end of the day, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's not going to overlook the account of the rights of others in the slightest.
Jazakallah khairan. Thank you.
There was a question, is there something specific that needs to be done on the night of Nifs al-Sha'ban? So for those who may not know, Nifs al-Sha'ban, that is considered to be the halfway point in the month of Sha'ban. So right now we're in the month of Sha'ban, and so Nisf Sha'ban is going to be the night of the 15th of Sha'ban. So the thing is that there are different narrations about the Nisf Sha'ban. However, none of them are at the level of being rigorously authenticated. However, there are enough narrations in regards to it, as well as the actions of the early Salaf, the early generations of Muslims, to establish that there does seem to be a significance in regards to the Nisf Sha'ban, even to the point of Ibn Taymiyyah, mentions the aspect of it being good to do extra acts of worship on the Nisf Sha'ban. Now, the thing is that, is there anything specific that should be done? There hasn't been anything specific in regards to, like, for example, something that the Prophet ﷺ specifically did on Nisf Sha'ban or the like. But again, the ulama in general mention of trying to do different acts of worship, and some ulama will give different recommendations of what a person should do. But for example, Ibn Taymiyyah in one of his answers that he gave to someone asking a question, he says, إذا صلى إنسان ليلة نفس وحده أو في جماعة خاصة كما كان يفعل طوائف من السلف فهو أحسن. So he says, in this particular explanation, he says that if a person on the night of Sha'ban, if a person prays on the night of the mid of Sha'ban, the Nifs of Sha'ban, by himself or in a congregation, specifically, كما كان يفعل طوائف من السلف, just like some of the pious predecessors used to do, فهو أحسن. Then this is best. وأما الاجتماع في مساجد على صلاة مقدرة. However, gathering together at mosque and praying a set number of prayers, for example, like praying 100 rakahs while reciting Surah Al-Ikhlas 1,000 times, will be considered a reprehensible innovation, which none of the scholars permitted. So this was Ibn Taymiyyah's personal position in terms of a fatwa that he issued, but I mentioned that not to necessarily say that I'm fully taking Ibn Taymiyyah's position on the matter, but to show that even Ibn Taymiyyah had recognized the aspect of there being enough narrations and actions upon doing things, doing extra acts of worship on the Nisf Sha'ban, to establish that one can and should, as he mentions, is ahsan, to engage in acts of worship during the Nisf Sha'ban. But again, there's nothing specifically legislated to particularly do in relation to this. Welcome your reflections on the distinctions between tafsir kathir, ma'rifat al-Quran, and tazkir al-Quran. So I'm not as familiar with tazkir al-Quran. However, Ibn Kathir, and so all of these books that are being mentioned, these are books of tafsir, books of Quranic explanation. So Ibn Kathir's book of tafsir, for one, the full tafsir has not been translated into English. It's an abridged version. So there is a bias in regards to what has been translated of it. But Ibn Kathir in general, his tafsir is primarily hadith based. So essentially what Ibn Kathir is doing is that the different verses of Quran, he's relating different ahadith that help to further explain the verses of Quran. Ma'rifatul Quran, if it's the same one that I'm familiar with, that was a tafsir that was done by the father of Mufti Taqi Usmani, and this was essentially a explanation and a practical guide in relation to the verses of the Quran. So that would be, so it's not to say that, for example, in Ma'rifat al-Quran, that they don't use different ahadith to help explain. But again, Ibn Kathir's tafsir is primarily based upon explaining the tafsir of the Quran with hadith. Whereas Ma'rifat al-Quran is an aspect of, a practical guide. Because if I'm not mistaken, in regards to what you're mentioning in terms of the text, Ma'rifat al-Quran was actually based upon Mufti Taqi Usmani. His father actually was doing a radio broadcast series of explanation of the Quran, and it was suggested that it be placed into a book that was first done in Urdu, and then it was said that it should be translated into English. And so Mufti Taqi Usmani, as well as someone else, I forget who it was, had worked on the translation of it into English. But again, it started out as a radio broadcast that Mufti Taqi Usmani's father had done. And Allah knows best. What if you didn't mean to harm them? Do they still get your good deeds? The thing is that it's not a guarantee that a person will take your good deeds. It's just that is one of the possible consequences of harming others, is that if you don't reconcile the situation previously, and if that person does not forgive you all the way up until Yawm al-Qiyamah, all the way up to the Day of Judgment, then that person would have the option of taking your good deeds as compensation for the wrong that they've received from you. Is there an explanation comparison of the different schools of law in one place? If you're talking about the actual rulings themselves, then as I mentioned in the last one, is that there's a work that is called Islamic Jurisprudence according to the four schools of Islamic, according to the four Sunni schools. if you're talking about just like knowledge of like the differences between the four schools of law and so on and so forth, there are a number of different works that talk about it. Imam Abdullah Ali, he has a work that's actually a translation of Ibn Taymiyyah in defending the four imams or something of that nature. And then there are other works that, you know, for example, Sheikh Jibril Haddad, he has a work on the four imams. And so there are a number of different works in relation to the four schools of law. But in terms of, if you're trying to see the difference in terms of rulings, then that book, Islamic Jurisprudence According to the Four Sunni Schools, that would be one that's in English, but that is meant as a reference text. It's not really meant as like a read through text, so to speak.
The second book that you mentioned, not the jurisprudence according to the, there's two books that you mentioned, the first two books.
So the other one I mentioned was Ustad Abdullah Ali has a book that he translated by Ibn Taymiyyah. It's like in defense of the four imams or something like that. I don't remember the exact name of it, but Sheikh Abdullah Ali from Lamppost Productions, he wrote a book that was a translation of Ibn Taymiyyah. Like I said, I believe the title is In Defense of the Four Imams or something like that. And then I mentioned Imam Jibril Haddad. He has a book on the four imams. I don't remember exactly what the title of it is, but it's something, you know, it might just be as simple as the four imams or something like that. But in general, there are many works that have been published that talk about the four imams. There's a question, can Laylatul Qadr be on any night during Ramadan? So the Prophet ﷺ, he never informed the Ummah of exactly when Laylatul Qadr was. However, we have different ahadith where he's indicated that it's more likely to happen in the last 10 nights, and it's more likely to happen in one of the last 10 odd nights. So we're talking about the 21st, 23rd, 25th, 27th, 29th night. And then there are other narrations that seem to say or seem to indicate that the 27th is the likely night. However, there are ulama, there are scholars who have said that the night of Laylatul Qadr can be any time during Ramadan. And then you even have some who've taken a very minority opinion, like this is not considered to be the majority of it, but there have been some ulama in history that have taken a very minor opinion that would say that Laylatul Qadr can be any night of the year. It doesn't even necessarily have to be Ramadan. But the basis of it is that part of it is us not knowing when it is a emphasis for us to try to utilize every night as if it's Laylatul Qadr. So that if we're using every night as if it's Laylatul Qadr, then no matter what night that Laylatul Qadr may fall upon, then inshallah we will receive the benefit therein. Is Taraweeh ever in chronological order? What do you mean by chronological? You're talking about the recitation of the Quran and the Taraweeh prayer? So generally speaking, in most masajids, they do the recitation in chronological. And do you mean do you mean chronological? Do you mean like in order of revelation? or just, starting with Fatiha, then going to Baqarah, then going to Ali Imran, then going to Nisa? I mean, like the order that we have the Mus'haf in currently, or like in the order of revelation? Because if you're talking about order of revelation, I've never heard of anyone. I don't even know if there's someone alive today who is capable of doing that. They may be, but I don't know of anyone specifically that would be capable of doing that. But in terms of, if you're just mentioning in terms of the order of the Quran that we have it in regards to the actual Mus'haf that we have today, then most, if not all, masajids that have a full Taraweeh will do that. That they're going to start with Surah Al-Baqarah, and then they're going to end with Surah An-Nas, having gone through the entire Quran in its proper order. And I actually wanted to mention, before we get too close to the ending for today's session, is that probably in mid-May, inshallah, I intend to do a 8-week class on why Islam is true. So this is based upon my teacher, Sheikh Hamza Karamali, his program of why Islam is true. So I'm in the process now of receiving certification for that particular course. And in the middle of May, inshallah, I intend to do an 8-week program, an 8-week course, covering the materials of that course. So if there's anyone that would be interested in that, it's going to be limited to 10 people max. So if anyone was interested in that, they can send me an email at the email that I just put in the chat, tariq.amir@meccacentral.com, and we can place you upon the list of possible people to take that course. And so this course is going over that when we say that we believe in Allah and we believe in the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, this is not something that we believe just upon faith or just upon preference, but rather this is something where we believe with actual evidence that I can prove to someone that Islam is true. It's not that I just firmly believe that Islam is true, but no, I can actually prove to you with evidence that Islam is true. So that's when people like Richard Dawkins or others who will question religion altogether and so on and so forth, is that, how do we respond to that based upon evidence? Meaning that I'm not just saying, well, the Quran says, but I can actually use the same, evidential methods that will be accepted by anyone to actually prove that Islam is true. So this is, a basic basis of the course. So if anyone was, again, if anyone will be interested in that type of course, then inshallah, you can send me an email. Is there a specific time during the day after a certain prayer, for example, to make dhikr during Ramadan? I know night prayers are highly recommended, so rewarded, but I'm wondering if there are specific times during the day. So anytime after the obligatory prayer is a time where prayers are answered. So after finishing the obligatory prayers, the sunnah is that you do du'as after that. And so this is a time when du'as are accepted. But in general, anytime that you have a sincere du'a, as one of my teachers would say, know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to give you something. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's not unaware of anything that happens. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He whenever you make a du'a, that is a du'a that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already placed upon your tongue. And so that's an indication that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually wants to give you that thing. whether he's going to give it to you in this life, or even better, if he's going to save it for you in the akhirah. So, but after the obligatory prayer is a good time to make dua. And then, as you mentioned, in the last third of the night is also a good time in dua to make dua. Also, when a person is in sujood, in particular, if you know how to say it in Arabic, what it is that you're asking for, that's another time that is good to make dua. So these are some of the times that have been mentioned in terms of making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So someone had asked, why is it only 10? That's what I was told to limit it to. So this is not necessarily a fully public event in terms of the class, but it's more it's a more private class. What is the distinction between a mufti and a sheikh? I mean, in our times today, oftentimes these are just terms in general, but if you want to, it'll take me a while to try to really get into it, but essentially, someone who is given the title of mufti, generally speaking, that is going to be considered a person who has the authority to issue a fatwa, meaning that they can give a legal verdict on a matter when a person asks them a question. So that is more or less considered to be the aspect of a mufti. A sheikh, that, there's so many different interpretations that can be, but oftentimes a sheikh is regarded to be an Islamic scholar, in some realms. But it's to say that that person may not necessarily be able to give fatwa. So a mufti is something more specific. Again, it's the aspect of someone that is able to issue a legal verdict. Whereas a sheikh can be someone who's knowledgeable in, whatever Islamic science that he's knowledgeable in. But, even from the standpoint of the actual term itself, is that a sheikh can also be considered to be an old man. So the thing is that that's why I said, in our days, these are terms that, depending on the people that you're talking to and the environment that you're in, they'll have different connotations. But those are kind of like some of the basic aspects of it. What is the cost? To be determined. But inshallah, it won't be something that would be drastically expensive or anything like that. And more than likely, if cost is going to be an issue, we would probably work something out so that inshallah it would no longer be an issue. Regarding a woman changing so as not changing her last name after marriage, is the Islamic or cultural reasons why a woman does not change her name? Essentially, from the Islamic perspective, is that when a woman gets married, she does not become her husband. Meaning that a woman has her own lineage. And so changing of the last name is, a situation of kind of like, taking on, a woman taking on the lineage of her husband. And that's not the case. When a woman gets married, she still has her own lineage. And so from an Islamic perspective, she holds on to that lineage, that her father is still her father. And so, from the Islamic perspective, we say that, it's a patrilineal deen. So the lineage goes to the father as long as it's in a marital situation. And so keeping that lineage is something that the Sharia requires. And so this is, the basic reason of why a woman does not necessarily change her last name when she gets married. It's the aspect of maintaining her lineage and not taking on someone else's lineage just because she's now married. Can a husband and a wife who have been separated reconcile and get back together after the period of 3 menstruations have passed after the first mention of divorce? So Yes, they can, as long as as long as it's no more, like the divorce has not been pronounced, such that it's irrevocable, meaning that the husband has not pronounced divorce upon his wife 3 times or more. But they would have to do a new nikah. So it's not going to be, it's not going to just be a raja. It's not just going to be a return. They would have to do a whole nother nikah, and they would still be down one divorce. So for example, anytime that a husband and wife get married, the husband has 3 divorces that can be given. So if a husband uses one of them, and then the iddah period, the time of a woman's menstrual cycle elapses, such that her iddah period finishes, and they have not returned to the marriage, then they would have to redo the nikah again, and they would still now only have 2 divorces left that the husband could utilize. We didn't know this, and I just changed my name. Do I need to change it back? It would be recommended to change it back. The only exception that, I've heard some of my teachers mention is, like, for example, people of African American descent, where like the last name that we have is not necessarily the last name of our ancestors. And so some of the ulama have, given some leeway in regards to that. But even, some of my teachers have said that, even still, to keep the name of, your forefathers would still, like, so for example, I know one of my friends who's African American, and his last name was a name that his father had changed to be a more, Arab sounding name, so to speak. And one of the things that he had did at one point was that he actually put a hyphen in his name. And so he took his father's given name that was connected to his grandfather and so on and so forth, and then he connected it to his name so that he would have it both. And I've actually thought to do it. I just didn't feel like going through the legal process of having it done. So, like, for example, my last name is Amir, but my grandfather's last name is Chambers. And so I thought about, hyphenating my last name, so it'd be Chambers Amir, so that, you still have that that lineage that goes back. And part of the aspect of it is that, for example, generations down the line, they may not know how to reconnect to their lineage, meaning that, they may not have known that there was a change in the name, such that they can trace back their lineage. And so again, one of the things that the sacred law has come to protect is a person's lineage. And so lineages are taken very seriously in Islam. Fasting after the 15th of Sha'ban is not permissible / is disliked except for the habitually fast. This true for all madhabs, specifically Hanafi? I don't know specifically in the Hanafi madhab. Imam Kamal or Ustad Murad would be much more knowledgeable in regards to that. But in general, the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad indicates that, is that the Prophet he recommended that people who are not accustomed to fasting, meaning that they don't have a regular practice of fasting, that they should not fast after the 15th of Sha'ban, rather that they should just wait until Ramadan begins. So, but I don't know how the Hanafi madhab interprets this particular hadith. So Ustad Murad or Imam Kamal would be much better to ask specifically from the standpoint of the Hanafi madhab. Is it allowed to recite Astaghfirullah, Salawat ala Nabi, and La ilaha illallah 99 times each? Is there a way to do dhikr that's not okay? Some people say that it is something Sufis do and is therefore bid'ah. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that, in our times today, if you want to say that something is wrong, you just blame Sufis. Like, oh, the Sufis do that, and so it's bid'ah, or the Sufis do X, Y, and Z, and it's bid'ah, and so on and so forth. The thing is that, the aspect of Sufis is that Sufis get a bad rap. so to speak. And so the thing is that for one, oftentimes people don't even necessarily know what it means when we even say the word Sufi. In particular in relation to what tasawwuf or Sufism has traditionally meant. But in any case, in terms of dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in general, the Prophet ﷺ and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, basically said this, is that that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's mentioned that we should remember him much. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, in the Quran, he said, الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. That, those who remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ, that they remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala standing, sitting, and lying on their sides. That the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's emphasized to us the importance of dhikr, the importance of the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in many of his, his addresses to us. And so the thing is that in general, dhikr is something that a person should do as much as they're capable of doing it. And so if a person decides to have a particular wird, because basically this is what this relates to, is having a regular regiment of dhikr that you do. So if a person wanted to have a regular wird of saying astaghfirullah and salawats upon the Prophet ﷺ and la ilaha illallah 99 times each, then that is perfectly fine to do so. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not necessarily restricted the aspect of dhikr, that a person can engage in dhikr, as the saying would go, till the cows come home. But again, the aspect of Sufis, as one of the more Mauritanian shuyukh would say, poor tasawwuf. Tasawwuf is something that really gets a bad rap, and it's just misunderstood, because yes, there are plenty of people who do a lot of corrupt things in the name of tasawwuf. There are plenty of things that people do in the name of tasawwuf that are problematic, whether it be a bid'ah or even haram or whatever the case may be. But to dismantle or to do away completely with the whole science of tasawwuf, that's also going to another extreme. And so, tasawwuf, actually, Imam Kamal actually was doing a course on the realities of Sufism. And so, if he ever does that course, that would be a good course to take, because it tries to clarify some of these misconceptions that people have of the true essence of tasawwuf. And if you wanted to, you can actually just you can purchase the book if you want to. It's called Realities of Sufism. I think where it becomes haram is when you add the dancing, which is associated with Sufis. So even the aspect of like the spiritual dancing and these type of things, the aspect of, that is going to go into the realm of fiqh in terms of what different ulama, what different scholars consider to be the limits in regards to movement of the body. And so the thing is that we can't even categorically say that, quote unquote, some of the Sufi dancing is necessarily going to be haram in terms of a standpoint of ijma', in terms of a standpoint of consensus of the scholars. Will there be some scholars who will say that it is haram? Yes. However, will there be other scholars who will say that it's not? Definitely. So this is, again, this is going to be left in the realm of the ulama in terms of a fiqh question. Because we would have to ask a question, okay, what is the ruling on dancing? What is the ruling on dancing while doing dhikr? And so on and so forth. And so, this goes into a whole situation of again, the aspects of fiqh and this is something that is left in the realm of the ulama of fiqh, and you're going to have difference of opinion in regards to it. You know, throughout history, ulama have had difference of opinion in regards to it. But the true essence of tasawwuf is not about dancing. So any other questions before we head towards the end for tonight? Or any other comments? Alhamdulillah. Any benefit is only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And please forgive me for my ignorance and my mistakes. Inshallah ta'ala, we will have a Ramadan prep session with March 9th. I'm happy that was mentioned because I actually didn't even remember what date it was set for, or even if I even agreed to a date, but now I know, March 9th, inshallah.
Jazakallah khairan. Thank you so much for the class. I'm having difficulty like writing to everyone in the chat. That's why I'm just saying directly. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Again, any benefit is only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Any other questions or? Not-
What time, further, excuse me, what time do we end here?
So we go from 6:30 to 8:30.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, like when we used to do it in New York in person, we used to go from 6:30 to 8:30, and then we would have dinner together. But usually we would start to have dinner sometime around 7:30 or so. So as you can see, I was very informal because typically speaking, you wouldn't eat while you're in a session or something like that, especially if you're not able to share it with everyone else. But that's part of me like keeping this like an informal situation. So please excuse me for nibbling on popcorn while I was in class. or while we were doing the Living Islam. All right, well, if there's no other comments or questions, then inshallah we can wrap up for tonight. Jazakallah khairan for being with us for our Living Islam session. And as was mentioned, inshallah we will have a Ramadan prep session March 9th, bismillah. And also if you're interested in the Why Islam is True course, inshallah, you can send me your information. And like I said, that should be sometime in the middle of May or so, inshallah. Alhamdulillah, jazakallahu khairan. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alam, wa asmana wa ni'mal wakil. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brother.
Wa alaikum salam.